All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to take a different perspective here. We're going to look at the program statistics. So for those who know me, you understand, right? They want me to work with numbers, not words, while we're up here. So what we're going to do is go over a very high-level overview of the key statistics for the program. We're going to be providing some insights. We're going to look at how you can check on the performance of the program. And then we're going to talk for a few minutes about an increased level of interest in supplements. As you've seen throughout the program, we have the key, so we'll be touching many of these points throughout today's presentation. We're going to walk through the key statistical reports that the program publishes. This is for the entire ANDA program. We're going to go through the monthly and quarterly reports. We're going to look at the new fiscal year web posting, which is up and live. We'll talk about the historic GDF performance reports. We'll also briefly go through both the competitive generic therapy approvals and the FDA track reports that are out there. Quick note, the majority of the reports that the agency puts out, and certainly the very formal ones, are going to be on the fiscal year. So just sort of keep that in mind as you look through, and certainly there's going to be a difference between the fiscal year and the calendar year numbers for those who like to do a little bit of the comparison. Fiscal year aligns with all of the user fee programs, and it also aligns with some of the other non-user fee commitments that we have as a federal entity. So in going through the monthly and quarterly reports, this is your best source of information about what's happening within the program. It's going to capture actions. That's everybody's favorite, the approvals, tentative approvals, complete response letters. We're going to get into the submissions. What are you guys sending us? What's in the queue? We'll also, on a quarterly basis, update the approval times, and we'll give you a little bit more information about that as we go through this afternoon's presentation. So as you can see, both mean and median time for the approval and for the tentative approval are posted. In fact, the new quarterly reports are up there so you can see what's going on already into Q1 for this FY. When we talk about the approval time, very important to understand when it starts and when it stops. It starts with the accepted application. If we refuse it, it doesn't count. But when it's accepted, that submission date for that acceptance all the way through to the first approval or tentative approval, that's what we're counting. So that means when you look at the total time to approval for an application, it's both times with the FDA and times with the companies. Time responding to information requests, time responding to formal complete response letters where it's totally off our clock. That still does get compressed within the start to finish approval time. So certainly keep that in mind. Here's sort of a diagram outlining what we just spoke about. You can see all the different touch points that happen and how busy the team is sort of in the middle, making sure that everything is running right. And then we'll get into a little bit on these calculations. And the reason why we're going to end it with the first action, whether it's approval or tentative approval, that stops it. Now that means there can be subsequent actions. Tentative approval, great example. We want there to be a subsequent action that comes in to convert that tentative approval into a full approval. There are certain cases after a full approval, company can come in and get a new strength approval. Right? That can be part of the original application, just depending on how it's submitted from the applicant. So we do have split cases. That second approval is still going to go through. None of that's on the clock. It stops with that first one. That's giving you the most meaningful information in terms of, I want to submit an application today, what does the landscape look like? And so as we go through to the next report, you can see a little bit more on the variation between the mean and median. We expect that. Lots of things happening, clusters of applications moving forward, different efforts on industry to clean house. Periodically, we see that. Company starts to move a particular set of applications through. That can all add to the variability. So we expect that deviation. We're looking at quarter to quarter. I want to point out that there's a big difference between the mean, the average, and the median time. We expect that too. What that shows is the level of effort that's going into the new applications that are being submitted under GDF 3. Pick those up, move them forward. What we often see with companies is making a decision. Do I work on an old application or do I continue to work on application that was more newly submitted? Are you going to have a choice as a company? I have an IR or DRL that came from the agency. At the same time, I have a complete response on another application. Where do I move my resources? You guys will have to answer those questions, but we can see how that plays out. Companies are focusing their efforts on the newer applications. They're focusing on answering the IRs and DRLs because those have very tight response timeframes, and they're letting some of the older applications languish. And so what we see with that big difference is there's a lot of old applications that industry is still interested in. They're just moving them through at a slower pace. We'll take anything. Right? It's our job to deal with it. You send it in, we'll jump on it. If you're going to be slow, then let us know. And of course, there's some other requirements. If it's going to take you longer than a year to submit your response, let us know, we'll work with you. Here's a depiction of the approval times, and really a set of 3 of these we'll move through very quickly. I want to highlight the impact of the user fee programs, especially want to highlight the impact of putting in goals. As you can see, the goal is now driving the response. We take those goals very seriously. A lot of effort and coordination. Typical government, a lot of just-in-time management, people scrambling around at the end to make sure that application is ready to go and all the pieces are in place. And so you can see, right, our response is coming in right at that goal date. That's a huge win for the program. Now go to a challenge question. New application approval times, are they likely to be longer than prior years, the same as prior years, or faster? Vast majority of the time, they're going to be flowing through much quicker. Obviously, there's exceptions, but if you take advantage of the different tools, the communications, you've already heard about the meetings, these applications can fly through. Now, shift gears a little bit into imminent action, or for those who've been around a little while, it used to be called the imminent approval process. We will miss the original goal date in certain situations where it's in everybody's best interest to move an application into that final tentative approval or approval. If it's an important product, we'll get it done. Right? We'll skip the TA and go right into approval. We'll move products for big forfeiture dates. So we will work with the company, try to give us as much of the goal period as possible, but clearly denote in your cover letter, this has an ELA date of XYZ. We will work with you when it's feasible. The other one is to bring a small issue to approval or tentative approval. We're nearly done. We have finished our assessment on time. We could issue the complete response and meet the goal. But we want you to finish that application. Get it over the threshold, right? Cross the finish line. And so we will send what often comes across as a very late cycle IR or DRL. Oftentimes these have even shorter response times. We're getting near the goal date. You may see a date a couple weeks in advance of the goal date. That's an indication that we may be trying to move your application towards the approval or tentative approval with this imminent action pathway, as opposed to taking that hard time out and pulling together the complete response letter, which of course formally puts it back in your court and starts the whole new queue and all of those things. So provide a thorough response. That's the key. And then if you have any issues with the status of the application, you're not sure, is it moving the right direction or not, talk to the regulatory project manager, and you're going to hear from a couple of them in a few moments. Now, we want to point out a couple things. There has been some criticism of the agency in the past that we're overcounting tentative approvals. We count each time a package goes out the door with a tentative approval. It's as simple as that. This effort actually costs us. It reduces our tentative approval count because we will skip the tentative approval if we're very close to that full approval date. Because we know there's not going to be enough time for you to receive the tentative approval, pull together the final conversion request, and of course get it back to us to do all the double checks. Is the facility still good? Is the DMF good? Is the labeling up to date? All of those kind of things. So if you're real close to getting it, we'll push you through. Talk to the project manager. They can help in these situations. We do that on purpose. Right? That's the win. You guys then get better business certainty. You know when your dates are coming up, you can start to monitor the communications from the team. It increases your chance of being approved on that early lawful approval date. Right? That's the earliest date we're allowed to take the official approval action. And it also takes the worry out of some of the submission timing, which we'll show you some examples of in a couple slides. First, You don't have to worry as much about the weekends. I know in the past I'd receive calls, oh, if I send it in today, the 90-day, it's going to be on the weekend. What do I do? We got the big ELOD date coming up. This takes care of all of that. Send it in. Give us a couple extra days in front of the ELOD, that's fine. Like, you don't have to time it perfectly. You don't have to worry about leap day and other things. We've had companies call us, we're not sure what happens, or there's a holiday, or sometimes there's even unexpected government holidays. Don't worry. Give us as much of that goal date as possible. Err on the side of having that 90 days if it's a minor amendment conversion come a day or two before the ELOD. We will work with you to make sure we hit that date. If it's on a weekend, then obviously we're forced to take action the next business day, right? We'll take that into account. Let me make sure everybody understands that. If there's no ELOD, then we'll work ahead of the weekend. But if there's an ELOD, we can't approve it before. And that's worth repeating, because a lot of times companies will call me on Friday, the ELOD Saturday, we don't have the approval. That's not a failure. That's a sign of success. Our folks have managed the legal landscape and lined that application up for success. Then the goal dates before the ELOD, we talked about that a little bit. That's fine, we'll work with you. We'll use this process to move that application past the goal date, give you the approval on the ELOD. Do this to help you, and we do this to help the patients. They are getting access to this products. That's part of our mission. Safe, effective, high quality generic drugs available to the patients. This helps get that into the hands of the patients. Imminent action statistics. This has caused a little bit of sort of double counting by people. When we show this statistic, 57 approvals, 6 of them are imminent actions. That means out of those 57, those actions occurred. We're not lining up and counting potential things in the future. These are real. We took an action that month that was an imminent action. It was a full approval. We worked past the goal date to get you that full approval. Then we have a fiscal year web posting. This is new from GDF 3. Lots of data captured on all different aspects of the application cycles, the originals, the amendments, supplements. A lot of information on meetings, DMFs, statistics on the imminent actions that we just spoke about. Will help you understand how to read the report. And in this case, very simple. We have to do this based on the data that's available at the time. So oftentimes, the preliminary numbers are going to be just that. These are long goal dates. Some of the goal dates are 10 months, not even counting imminent actions or other type of extensions. So certainly an application submitted in one fiscal year can cross over into the next fiscal year. At the end of the first fiscal year, we've got to do a preliminary report. How many did we answer out of all those that came in? How many of those answered were on time? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give you data as close to real time as possible. We are not waiting for that last application that's fully baked years from now to work its way across. That's too late for you to figure out what's going on. We do this too to help keep all of the user fee programs lined up and messaging consistently. Now, what we did with the web report is we took sections out of the historic performance report and put them into the web version. We tried to mimic the physical sort of layout as much as possible. The old performance report actually has its origins into a paper format. What we've done here is try to modernize a little bit, go right to the web page, get it out into the public hands sooner. But it's the same information. We've actually just taken sections out of the old performance report, put them on the web so you can see it sooner. We are still going to leave the key information in the formal performance reports, but this helps you. You can see what's going on. You can measure how your company's doing against sort of the aggregate of information that we're capturing on these reports. And very important too for industry, that it helps to focus other government agencies on goals that really matter. We are graded on the official performance report. And so we will put the high-level goals in there. And if we fail those goals, then shame on us. Now, we will work very hard not to. And we have a great track record of meeting the goals. At the same time, there are all sorts of different sub-goals that are out there. Amendments, supplements, amendments to supplements, PFCs, right? sending the facility information in advance with a supplement, without a supplement, with an amendment, without an amendment. By the time you map those out, even though we deal with thousands of applications, there are certain cases where the total pool is less than 10 applications. We miss one, somebody like GAO can come in and audit. So let's take that off the table. We'll focus on the high-level metrics. You will still get to see data on all of those smaller metrics. That's what will be captured in the web report. You'll know whether the amendment with the PFC, did we do 6 out of 7? But you don't want us having to report that to GAO, because what that means is GAO lands, everybody gets wet. We've got to stop doing our work, educate them on what's going on in the program, show them that it's a one-off type of issue where the other hundreds and hundreds of applications are moving through successfully. And in case of supplements, thousands of applications moving through successfully. And it keeps us from having to publicly report the reason we missed. Sometimes it's us, we all know that. Sometimes it's not us, and you don't want us to say it was a facility that had data integrity issues. It was a facility where we're waiting for another federal agency to take an official action on. That doesn't help you, and it doesn't help the larger generic industry. So we think this is a responsible way of still sharing all of the information we had done, but keeping the spotlight on what really matters. Then there's a potential range that's included here. Gives the absolute worst case, absolute best case. If we miss everything else from today or we make everything else, that's what it comes out to. So when we look at this, there's an imminent actions column. That's what really matters. That should be your takeaway from the report. In the commitment letter, it allows us to go through past the goal date, as long as we follow these rules, and get an approval or tentative approval action to you within 60 days. And so if you see a metric, percent completed on time, sort of the gray here in your chart, looks like it's below the 90% commitment. That's because we're turning a majority of these into real approval actions. Go to the green, that little circle at the end, we're at 90%. That's not a failure, that's a success. We could have given you the complete response in the majority of times and gotten credit for the goal, but we will work towards the approval. So challenge question. Imminent actions reported as a subset of the approvals and tentative approvals, additive, or future ones? It's a subset. We're only going to report what actually happened. We're not getting into the prediction game. Does an imminent action count as meeting the goal if it's approved in the second cycle? If it's done prior to the goal date? If it's done within 60 days of the goal date, or with 61 days or later? 60 days. If we approve it on day 61, you get the approval, we take the miss. So we work very hard to hit that 60 days. Then there's the official performance report. This has been out for many years, so we don't need to walk through that. Competitive generic therapies, if you're looking to see where we need to align together to work to move applications to help, take a look at this. FDA track, it's got a lot of information. What's very unique is it gives you a little bit more insights into how the first cycle performance is looking. Did all this work to compile the application? I sent it to the agency. How are they doing? So what to watch for? Fewer complete response letters. That doesn't mean there's a problem. It means we're using the extensions. It's in the commitment. Industry asks, oh, we're close to the finish line, work it through. We're doing that. Fewer minor amendments being received. It's not that industry is shutting down. It's the fact that we're sending out the extensions. If your refuse to receive rate lower than average, you're doing it right. You're getting fewer complete response letters, you're doing it right. You're approved on the ELOD, we're both doing it right. Your approval time is low, we're both doing it right. We're working together. Then I want to end with some information on supplements. We're seeing more and more interest on these. People asking what type to change. Getting status requests on CDEs at an alarming rate, much more than we have historically. Over 10,000 submitted, right? Divide that number by the number of people we have, a staggering amount, especially if you're a project manager. An application's an application, a supplement has all the same features. Triage, letter prepared, all of those kind of things. You may have to advance. I'm stalled out here. Story of my career, right? All right. Record year for approvals. When you combined everything that's come in on the supplements, right, off the charts, we approved more than we received. And as we talked about, more interest from companies, it means they're calling their congressman, they're calling the commissioner. So we're seeing more interest from other people at an alarming rate. I think we're back on here, thank you. Now here's some statistics, right? You can sort of see the trend up and up. And here's a great one. Prior approval supplements. Look at the difference when we took the fee away at the beginning of FY18 and the growth since then. So lots and lots of data is available out there. You can gauge the success of GDF 3. You can look at the health of our program. You can look at the health of your company. How are you stacking up with other companies that are out there? And it's a great time to submit the ANDA. You submit it, you take advantage of some of these opportunities we've been talking about at this conference. It will sail through very quickly. And we'll work on the supplements. You don't know how many times I'm called, hey, can you hurry up and approve it because we need to then send in our supplements because we got a bigger launch date coming up later on. Right? We will work with the application, pre-approval, post-approval, whatever it takes to make the product available. So with that, thank you guys very much. And I will turn it over to Andre. He's going to talk a little bit more.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Andre Perloni. I'm the branch chief for the Imports Compliance branch in the Division of Global Drug Distribution and Policy in the Office of Drug Security, Integrity, and Response in the Office of Compliance. I will be talking about provide an overview of the pre-launch activities importation request, or as we call it, PLAIR. Learning objectives, PLAIR overview and product eligibility, define when and how a PLAIR can be submitted, list the information that should be submitted to FDA in a PLAIR, and explain the circumstances under which FDA intends to grant a PLAIR and the import process. Why PLAIR? Section 505A of the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act prohibits the introduction into interstate commerce of any new drug unless an approval of an application is effective. Section 801A3 of the Act in part also say that the drug being imported is subject to refusal of admission if it's in violation of Section 505 of the Act. The PLAIR allows, under certain circumstances, product sponsors anticipating approval of a drug application to import the unapproved new drug to prepare it for market launch. What products are eligible? A finished dosage form drug product that is being imported to prepare for US market launch based on anticipated approval of a pending NDA, ANDA or ANDA, or a BLA regulated by CDER. A finished dosage of bulk product that may require minimal further processing such as final packaging and or labeling, or being a final package form. The PLAIR does not apply to APIs or active pharmaceutical ingredients or drug products subject to a supplement. When to submit a PLAIR? A PLAIR should be submitted at least 30 days prior to the proposed entry date of the shipment to allow time to process the submission. Additional time frame considerations. NDAs, ANDAs, and BLAs subject to standard review no more than 60 days before the user fee goal date. NDAs and BLAs subject to priority review up to 120 days before the user fee goal date. ANDAs subject to priority review up to 80 days before the user fee goal date. How to submit a PLAIR? FDA has developed an electronic submission system through the CDER NextGen portal. The CDER NextGen portal permits an applicant or authorized US agent to submit a PLAIR request to FDA electronically. It provides real-time communication with receipt confirmation, two-way communication, and communication history in a centralized location, a multi-factor authentication to ensure data security. What must be included in a PLAIR? The drug product name and how it's applied, the name of the CDER Office of New Drug and Office of Generic Drug Regulatory Project Manager assigned to the pending application, the NDC number if one is assigned, the name and address, registration number, and telephone number of the foreign manufacturer of the finished dosage form drug product, the name and address, registration number, and telephone number of the US consignee, application number of the finished dosage form product pending the FDA approval, a letter from FDA officially documenting the user fee goal date, and the precise quantity to be imported. Please note that only one import shipment will be allowed under a granted PLAIR. Name, facility identification, and telephone number of where the finished dosage form drug product will be stored pending approval. And for cases where there's minimal processing, right, information about the facility and the description of what that minimal processes is. The authorized representative applicant will also acknowledge that the product is an unapproved new drug and that the PLAIR represents the applicant's request to recondition the product under Section 801B of the Act and the 21 CFR 195 by obtaining product approval within the specified time frame. What actions FDA will take? Once a PLAIR is submitted, CDER PLAIR program will confirm receipt of the submission through the CDER NextGen portal. CDER will review the submission and assess completeness, timeliness, and among other things, foreign facility inspection history and conformity with applicable CGMPs. Following this review, the CDER PLAIR program will notify the applicant whether the PLAIR has been granted or denied through the CDER NextGen portal. Now we're gonna go to the importation process. The importer will upload the granted PLAIR letter into the Import Trade Auxiliary Communication System or will email the Import ORA division where the entry is presented. It will use the affirmation of compliance for PLAIR and the application number in the CBP's automated commercial environment system. Ensure that the foreign manufacturer is registered and include all non-importers in their registration prior to importation. The importer will upload the information, sorry. FDA will detain the product 6 months as an unapproved new drug and authorize the reconditioning in the manner and the conditions that were set forth in the granted PLAIR. How you secure release after detention when the application is approved. You will upload the approval letter into ITAX and the CDER NextGen portal, or you will email the FDA import district where the product is detained to secure release. No FDA Form 766 is required. The PLAIR covers that will be done to bring the product into compliance. FDA intends to refuse the unapproved drug if the application is not approved or 6 months has passed since the detention. The unapproved finished dosage form drug must be exported or destroyed within 90 days if it's refused of admission. Here are some resources that are available. We have the PLAIR guidance that describe what I just described in this presentation. We have our human drug import webpage, right? And some useful links to some of the information that is needed by the importer. How to contact us, you can email us at cderocplair mailbox at fda.hhs.gov. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Kim, and I'm a supervisor for the Division of Project Management in the Office of Generic Drugs. Andre gave a great presentation on PLAIR from the Office of Compliance perspective. Today, I'm going to zoom in a little and focus specifically on PLAIR for ANDAs and give you the Office of Generic Drugs perspective. So there are three main points I want to cover, which are: one, describe OGD's PLAIR process for ANDAs. Two, explain OGD's goal for PLAIR. And three, I want to leave you with some tips to maximize your chances for the FDA to grant the PLAIR. As Andre covered earlier, the PLAIR request begins with the Office of Compliance evaluating the PLAIR request and assigning it to the Deputy Director for the Division of Project Management. DPM's role is to decide if the PLAIR should be granted or denied. The PLAIR guidance provides request submission timeframes, or what I'll call the 30-60-80 rule. So all requests can be submitted no less than 30 days prior to the goal date or action date. For standard review applications, PLAIR requests can be submitted 60 days prior to the goal date, and for priority review applications, they can be submitted 80 days prior to the goal date. The Deputy Director then checks the database, and if the outcome is unclear, they'll request the Regulatory Project Manager, or RPM, to evaluate the likelihood of the disciplines being adequate or inadequate. The RPM will then consult with discipline PMs, and if the outcome is inadequate, they'll recommend denial of the PLAIR. If the pending disciplines are likely to be adequate and other disciplines are adequate, the RPM will recommend that the PLAIR be granted. Finally, the Deputy Director will then communicate that grant or deny decision to the Office of Compliance. So in an effort to mature the PLAIR program, OGD's goal is to maximize the usefulness of PLAIR by granting in advance of the goal date, while also avoiding a granted PLAIR that inaccurately indicates an upcoming action. So as a result, there will be more PLAIRs granted independent of a formal adequate decision. And finally, there will be more time required to grant the PLAIR. So for example, as I had mentioned earlier, for a priority review application, which the PLAIR can be submitted up to 80 days prior to the goal date. In these instances, sometimes the decision-making on PLAIRs may be deferred until an assessment of the disciplines until the assessment of the disciplines which are still pending may be made. So the next two slides here are a little wordy, but I wanted to provide you specific examples so that you can refer to it later. So for PLAIR submitted in a pending original ANDA or major amendment, OGD will now delay its response to a PLAIR if OGD believes an assessment decision is coming soon. So this is in contrast to previous practice where OGD would immediately recommend denial in the absence of an ANDA assessment being complete and adequate for relevant portions of the pending application. By deferring decision-making on PLAIRs in this situation to later on in the review cycle, the goal is to allow for more PLAIRs to be granted. For PLAIRs submitted in a pending minor amendment, if the discipline or disciplines have not yet completed their assessment when a PLAIR is received, OGD may now recommend granting the PLAIR absent of a signal of a potential deficiency. So this is a paradigm shift where previously a grant decision was only made when the disciplines had completed their assessments and found their portion of the application to be adequate. It's important to note that FDA granting of a PLAIR does not represent an implicit or explicit statement of the approvability of the ANDA, and if FDA does not approve the application, the product is subject to a refusal of admission into the United States. We try to balance the industry's desire to grant more PLAIRs while balancing avoiding too many granted PLAIR that inaccurately indicates an upcoming action and potential for the product to be subject to refusal. However, there will be some inherent risk and certain situations where a granted PLAIR will not lead to an approval in time, leading to a refusal of admission into the US. Finally, I want to leave you with some tips to maximize your chances that the FDA will grant your PLAIR. If you follow these tips, the odds will increase of a PLAIR being granted. First, complete your amendments, meaning address all of the comments from a CRL, IRDRL with your amendments. Number two, address your IRDRLs on time. However, don't violate the first tip by racing to respond on time without addressing all of the comments or questions, which may lead to more cycles or an incomplete response. Number three, assure facilities are adequate. Having facility problems is one way to guarantee a PLAIR denial. Four, assure DMFs are adequate and be aware of the ANDA action timing. Be in communication with your DMF holders so that there are no unsolicited DMF amendments submitted close to action, which could delay approval due to DMF amendments having to be reviewed. Number five, and I think this is the most important, but work with your regulatory project manager or RPM. While they cannot provide you a specific approval date, they can provide you the current discipline review statuses, a rough estimate of action dates, provide you an advice on when to check back on the status, and also provide confirmation of imminent action dates. Finally, subsequent PLAIRs are allowed, but be reasonable on the timing of subsequent PLAIR. While it's allowed to submit after denial, you should communicate with your RPM, and if you just had a PLAIR denied, think about some of the reasons why it may have been denied before you resubmit a PLAIR. For example, if you didn't address a CRL or facilities have issues, you should not expect that PLAIR to be granted if you didn't address that. It's always good to reach out to the RPM and have a conversation on a reasonable timing to submit a subsequent PLAIR. So for our challenge question today, when should a PLAIR not be submitted? A, no more than 60 days before goal date for ANDA subject to standard review. B, at least 30 days prior to proposed entry date of shipment. C, up to 120 days before goal date for ANDA subject to prior review. Or D, up to 80 days before goal date for ANDA subject to priority review. I think I heard C, that's correct. Up to 100 days before goal date. And this is actually the time frame for NDAs and BLAs, which I didn't cover today. So in closing, remember the 30-60-80 rule when submitting a PLAIR. Work with your RPMs and follow the tips, making sure to submit amendments that are complete, responding to IRDRLs on time, making sure DMS and facilities are adequate, and this will allow your PLAIR to be granted and successfully import unapproved finished drug products to prepare for market launch. Thank you, and I'll hand it over to Tom for the next presentation.
Thank you, Andrew and Andre, on your presentation on PLAIRs. Hi, my name is Tom Ching, Regulatory Project Manager in the Division of Project Management in the Office of Generic Drugs, and today I'll be presenting on information to include with a cover letter. The learning objectives for today are to explain the purpose of the cover letter as well as the cover letter attachment, examine the FDA-issued guidances related to cover letters, evaluate pertinent information to include with the cover letter based on the submission type, and to discuss available resources for applicants to draft an effective cover letter. So what is the purpose of a cover letter? It's to summarize the contents and identify the purpose of the submission, to highlight key elements of the submission, to provide required regulatory statements, such as the MMA verification statement, and ultimately is to help the FDA route and manage the submission effectively. This first guidance I'll be discussing is called the ANDA submissions content and format. What's useful about this guidance is it provides recommendations on forms and information to include in a cover letter. It also provides a suggested cover letter template for your use. Now, as you all know, a cover letter is included in Module 1 in the ECTD submission. This guidance provides cover letter header recommendations to clearly state if any major changes are made to please include it in the header. These major changes can include anything from changes in strength, concentration, RX to OTC changes, just to name a few. Applicants are encouraged to use this template that's in the ANDA submissions content and format guidance. They can adapt their cover letter to meet their specific needs and the submission type. The second guidance, called ANDA submissions amendments to ANDAs under GDUFA, provides useful information on recommendations for content to include in a cover letter for ANDA amendments, such as a statement indicating whether the amendment's unsolicited or in response to an FDA assessment, or the amendment classification is major or minor, just to name a few. Cover letter components. So every cover letter should have the company letterhead, the submission type, date, heading and reference, including the ANDA number, generic product name and strength, as well as the ECTD sequence number. Here's an example of a heading and reference with the relevant information, including the ANDA number, ECTD sequence number, and the generic name and strength. The cover letter should have a statement of how documents were submitted in the file structure, a name, signature, and contact information of the person submitting the information, a responsible official or a U.S. agent for the submission, including their email address, and reference to, if any, relevant FDA action letters, emails, or correspondences. Very importantly, cover letters should have the MMA verification statement, a regulatory description of the submission, including the appropriate regulatory information and hyperlinks to submitted information, a technical description of the submission, including the approximate size of the submission, and a statement that the submission was virus-free with a description of the software used to check for the virus. Now, now that we've discussed cover letters, let's discuss the purpose of a cover letter attachment. It serves as a guide or a checklist to prepare the cover letter. It facilitates accurate processing of the submission. So it serves as a tool to optimize cover letter sufficiency, and this helps the RPM triage more effectively. It ensures that all relevant information outlined in the checklist is addressed in the cover letter. So this serves as a backup in case an applicant forgets to mention any important or unsolicited information in their cover letter. And this also helps the FDA triage and manage submissions effectively. So not only does this help the RPM triage more effectively, it also helps the disciplines during their assessment to locate and incorporate needed information more effectively. And this guidance, called Cover Letter Attachments for Controlled Correspondence and ANDA Submissions, contains a cover letter attachment template for controlled correspondences, originals, amendments, as well as supplements. Applicants can modify the cover letter attachment template to meet their submission needs. Now, it's important to note that this does not replace the cover letter. It's intended as an add-on to assist the FDA in identifying and routing submissions correctly. It's highly recommended to prevent delays in review time. An example of how a cover letter attachment can be used to prevent delays in review time is oftentimes requests for reconsiderations and facility-based requests for reclassifications are difficult to differentiate and will benefit with the use of a cover letter attachment, as the applicant can just check off the appropriate box on the checklist that's in the attachment to signify that the submission contains one or the other requests. Information that's commonly omitted in a cover letter. Again, you see the MMA verification statement, priority requests on every resubmission, even after priority was previously granted, unsolicited information, new or revised patent certification, litigation, or carve-out updates, facility-based major to minor reclassification requests, and what's important about these are that the CGMP downgrade letter or withdrawn facility statement is necessary with the additional statement stating that the facility did not manufacture batches to conduct analyses to support the approval of the application. The major amendment information that are commonly omitted in cover letters include new batches and or studies, changes in manufacturing sites, reformulations, changes to DMF, as well as changes that would require an additional filing review. Another commonly omitted information we've been encountering in cover letters and in submissions in general are the identifications of a combination product. Under Section 503 G8CV, sponsors are required to identify their products as combination products and seeking agency action with respect to that product. This can be identified in the cover letter attachment, but it must be identified in Field 24 of the 356H form. And this is because combination products are under regulatory requirements, such as current GMP manufacturing practice requirements and post-marketing safety reporting requirements. So as a general review, what is a combination product? It is a product comprised of two or more different types of medical products. So a drug with a device, drug biologic, device biologic, or all three together. And for a more exhaustive list of what constitutes a combination product, please see 21 CFR 3.2E. For any questions regarding this topic, please contact the Office of Combination Products. On to best practices. Please include all new or major change information in the heading and/or reference, especially if combining submissions. In this example right here, this is a major CR resubmission with new strength information as well as new bio studies, clearly stated in the heading and reference to make it easily identifiable and easier for the FDA to triage. Now, although not required, it's highly recommended to include a cover letter attachment with your cover letter. Please highlight significant elements of your submission in the beginning of your cover letter. Highlight, bold, circle, anything to make it prominent and easily identifiable. Same goes with labeling carve-outs. Please separate each item in its own paragraph and use keywords versus vague or lengthy descriptions, such as reformulation versus changes to composition of product. So we have one challenge question for you. What are the commonly omitted information that should be included in the cover letter? Please choose all that apply. New batches or studies, changes in manufacturing sites, mention of unsolicited information in the submission, and priority requests on all submissions if applicable. And the answer is actually all four of these. So in summary, a cover letter should be used to help the FDA identify the purpose and route the content of the submission. It should clearly state any significant changes to the application are in the heading and/or reference, as well as the body of the cover letter. And a cover letter attachment should assist the FDA in identifying and routing submissions correctly as well, and is highly recommended to prevent delays in review time. And these are my resources for your reference. Thank you. Steve.
Thank you very much. My name is Stephen Yang. I'm a Regulatory Business Process Manager from the Office of Program and Regulatory Operations, OPRO. I'm in the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. And I'll be briefly just talking about some best practices from a Regulatory Business Process Manager perspective in communications. Our objectives, three of them, are we're going to discuss the form FDA 356H, the guidance for industry, some common errors, and some best practices. Also, we'll briefly touch on the withdrawal of approved ANDA supplements. And for communications, we'll discuss, again, briefly, four-part harmony and quality-related information requests and deficiencies. So for the form FDA 356H, guidance for industry, common errors, and best practices. From guidance to industry, we have the identification of manufacturing establishments in applications submitted to CBER and CDER questions and answers. This provides instructions on facility information to include in the form FDA 356H. It's not binding, so alternative approach can be used if it satisfies the requirements of the applicable statutes and regulations. And also we have the good ANDA submission practices guidelines for industry. Now, for resources, we have the abbreviated new drug application forms and submission requirements, instructions to complete for completing the form FDA 356H and the form FDA 356H. These resources and guidances are all available on our FDA website. Now, for some common errors that we as regulatory business process managers do see on the Form FDA 356, and this is just, a polling of regulatory business process managers. We sometimes do see the official responsible is no longer with the company. It's understandable. People, tend to move from location to location. So it's important that you update this information on your Form FDA 356H. Also, incorrect phone numbers and/or fax numbers. Again, stating the importance of, updating this form whenever there are changes to the phone number or fax number. Now, next common error we do see sometimes are misspellings or inadvertent spaces on email addresses. This is kind of silly in some ways, but it does happen sometimes. And so just, be extra careful when you're completing the information for your Form FDA 356H that your email address is correct, spelled properly, and no spaces in between. I've had on occasions where, once or twice where when confirming if a information request communication was received by an applicant, it turns out it was never received. And just upon, careful inspection, I've noticed that there was a misspelling that was in the Form FDA 356. So again, very common, a silly error. However, it does cause some, unnecessary delays. Also, please don't use the outdated version of the Form FDA 356. We do have a new one. In addition, some other common errors that we do see, incomplete establishment information. No DUNS numbers provided. FEA numbers do not match what we have on record, and boxes in established information are not completed. This just kind of takes time from regulatory business process managers to verify this information, just to make sure the information that you are supplying is correct and matches what we have. Again, taking time from doing more important parts of your application. Submission subtype and supplement category, if applicable, are not checked. Again, please check all boxes if appropriate. All drug substance manufacturing facilities referenced in the Drug Master File are not included in the Form FDA 356H. So it's important to remember that if you are referencing a Drug Master File, that you should include the facilities, appropriate facilities that are responsible for product manufacturing and testing. So now I'm going to go to some best practices. And first, of course, provide up-to-date contact information. It's very important, make sure you have the most up-to-date phone and fax numbers so that we can contact you in case we are in need of providing information to you or you providing information to us. Provide secure email address. We do have to check, we do check email addresses if they are secure before we issue any letters to applicants. If it's not secured, then we'll have to fax these letters, which means your fax numbers should also, make sure your fax numbers are all up to date. Again, it just takes just a little bit more time to fax rather than email. If you want to establish a secure email address, if you don't have, you can send requests to secure email at fda.hhs.gov, and they'll get you set up with secure email. Also, use the most up-to-date FDA Form 356H. And you can tell just by looking at the bottom of the form, it has the most recent edition, also indicates that the previous editions are obsolete. Continue with best practices. Provide detailed explanation and reasons for submission section. In particular for supplements, include all changes, not just the type of change. I have an example where an applicant indicated, it was a CB30. However, just provide the location in the application. So for us to kind of search and determine the reason. It'd be nice if that was already included in this section. Also, complete the establishment information completely. Make sure you check new if establishment is new for supplements. Check yes or no if an establishment is involved in the change. If it's left blank, it may be interpreted as no. So it's nice to make sure you check all the boxes when appropriate. Indicate if an establishment is active or withdrawn. So it goes without saying that checking all the necessary boxes leads to less confusion. And of course, less confusion just means that we're able to process your application in a much more timely manner. It's important to include all establishments for manufacturing and testing drug substance and drug product, but also include drug substance intermediate facilities. While it's obviously that the manufacturing sites for drug substance are included, sometimes the intermediate facilities are not. So it's important that you include that in your form FDA 356H. Include sterilization and micronization sites for your sterile products. Include facilities used for storing drug substances and processed material and commercial drug product under quarantine prior to disposition, a disposition decision. Include facility information contained in the DMF properly incorporated by reference. So going back, make sure if you're referencing the DMF, make sure you include the appropriate manufacturing and testing information in your 356H. Include facility withdrawals submitted in a DMF amendment. Also, for best practice, include establishment information with each amendment and supplement. For combination products, include the facility's manufacturing and constituent part of the co-package or single entity combination product or drug device combination product. If you're adding a new facility or remove one, please include in the form FDA 356 submitted with the amendment. Also, include DMF research and development or testing sites that generate release data to support an ANDA. Excipient testers do not need to be included unless it's critical to the drug product performance. Bioequivalence and testing sites do not need to be included. Container closure manufacturing and testing sites may not need to be included also. Also, please provide updated FEI number and DUNS information. And facilities, again, facilities associated with the DMF should be included in your 356H. If an approved facility is withdrawn before the application is approved, keep it in the 356H and check withdrawn. Also, if the site is ready for inspection, please indicate the correct boxes in that just to let us know if your facilities is ready for inspection in the appropriate boxes. Now, our first challenge question. The FDA will send an information request by email if the applicant's email address is unsecured. True or false? No, it's false. As I mentioned earlier, it's very important that you have a secure email address. And if you are in need of that, you can contact us and we can get you secure email address. Otherwise, we'll have to fax your information request letter. And again, that tends to take a little bit longer than actually getting the information by email, which is instantaneous. Now, my next topic, briefly, we'll just touch on withdrawing approved ANDA supplements. Now, we have the guidance for industry changes to an approved NDA or ANDA, changes to guidance, for submitting a post-approval changes. Applicants, when you're, withdrawing an approved supplement, you should submit this withdrawal of the approved supplement as a supplement, because withdrawing an approved supplement is actually a change. So as such, you should refer to the guidance, as I mentioned earlier, changes to an approved NDA or ANDA for submitting post-approval changes in accordance with 21 CFR 314.70. And as a side note, regulatory business process managers, we will be, contacting applicants if withdrawals of approved supplements are not submitted as a supplement. my next challenge question. Withdrawn and approved supplement is considered a post-approval change, true or false? So it's true, exactly true. Again, refer to the guidance, for post-approval changes for a NDA or ANDA. Now, the last topic I'd like to discuss is four-part harmony in deficiency communications. Just a little bit of a background. This is a map. This pertains to a map 5016.8 revision 1, using four-part harmony in quality-related assessment communications. This map is intended to promote efficient and effective communication between assessment teams and applicants. By clearly stating deficiencies and information requests with a rationale in such requests, help applicants address the issues successfully. Now, an applicant's lack of understanding of the issue may lead to a greater number of assessment cycles. So, hopefully this is what this four-part harmony will address, reducing the number of assessment cycles. Of course, continuing improvements on communications, IRs and deficiencies are in progress. So, this is a work in progress. However, it is agency-wide. So, hopefully you'll be seeing communications and deficiencies and information requests following this four-part harmony. Incidentally, this came as a result of a PDUFA commitment, but now it is agency-wide. So elements of four-part harmony. So the first element is what was provided. And this is just an acknowledgement of the information submitted and provide reference to relevant modules, sections, pages, or tables. Element 2 is what is the issue? And that's identifying missing information or information that FDA considers inadequate. 3 is what is needed. And that's requesting additional information or recommend an alternative approach to the addressed issue. And the last element, element 4, is why is it needed? And this is to state the basis for the information request or deficiency, and should include the impact of the issue on the overall regulatory decision and references to all or part of applicable regulations, statutes, guidances, and or FDA recognized consensus standards as appropriate. Now, I have an example of a four-part harmony in a quality related communication. So basically, for this example, we have for your drug product, we acknowledge the X month accelerated and Y month long-term stability data provided in section 3.2p.83. This is considered element 1. The provided stability data do not support the proposed shelf life because insufficient long-term data were provided to support extrapolation to 2 years. This is element 2. Provide updated stability data or support your proposed shelf life, otherwise revise your proposed shelf life, element 3. And for more information, see International Council for Harmonization for Guidance for Industry, Q1E evaluation of stability data, June 2004, including appendix, which provides recommendations for evaluating data to estimate a drug product's shelf life. This is element 4. So again, as I mentioned, this example is actually in the map and it is available in the FDA's website. So after receiving deficiencies, these are some of the expectations we have, and these are nothing new. Number 1, provide complete responses to all deficiency within the indicated time frame. Include information or data that has been requested. And remember, unsolicited information will alter the goal date. If extension is needed for your response, please notify FDA as soon as you know the extension is needed. This allows us to discuss whether or not it is possible to provide such an extension. And of course, after receiving your action letters, CR letter, applicants can request a post-CR clarification meeting for clarifying questions or for applications which are scientific, which meet the scientific type of application, a post-CR scientific meeting for scientification, I apologize, for complex products. So my last challenge question, which of the following is true regarding four-part regarding four-part harmony. A, it is intended to promote efficient and effective communication between assessment teams and applicants. B, what is the issue is an element of four-part harmony. C, clearly stating deficiencies in information requests and including a rationale in such requests helps applicants address the issue successfully. And D, all are true. Well, it's D, all are true. And these are the references I've used for my presentation, and they're all available on the FDA website. Thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to Brenda.
Okay, thank you so much. Everyone online and everyone still in the house. And
a lot of these questions are so application specific that it's very difficult to answer these questions without the context of more information. But we are doing our very best to give you good direction, even if it is to come back with control correspondence or something like that. Okay, so let's start with our panel. And okay, you guys like me to beg, don't you? Okay. In the house, one question, please.
Yes. So how long would you recommend that we leave a withdrawn facility on the 356H? Is it in perpetuity, or can it be removed after it's acknowledged or approved?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if it's still, if the facility I'm looking at, if the approved facility is withdrawn before application is approved, then you still want to keep it. So based on that.
Can I ask a clarifying with that? So like post-approval, if a facility is withdrawn,
Right.
can it eventually be removed
Yes.
from the 356H?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Second question in-house, please.
Yeah. This question is for Ang. On 356H, the form itself says it's an application for manufacturing a drug product and our NDA. So what is the logic in asking us to include the information of the intermediate manufacturers API and their testing facilities where we don't have any contact with them?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again, please?
See, 356H form is for manufacturing, application for manufacturing a drug product. Okay, and you're asking us to include the information of API manufacturers, contract test laboratories, as well as their key intermediate providers. What is the logic of this? Because as an ANDA applicant, I don't have a contract with any of those facilities of the API manufacturer.
Well, if you're referencing these if we're referencing these drug master, if you're referencing this drug master file, you're responsible for the facilities that are involved in that drug master file. If it's involved with manufacturing or testing of the product. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you should be aware of what facilities your drug master file is using.
Is it not the DMF holder's responsibility because you're reviewing the DMF as well?
Well, but it's also your responsibility to know what the DMF provider is using for a facility.
So can I ask another question?
Yeah.
You asked me.
Okay, so regarding the supplements like CB0 or CB30, what is the expectation of the agency for us to hold the product before we distribute it when we file a 30 or CB0?
Can you repeat that question again?
CB0 or CB30, what is the agency expectation for us to hold back till we make a decision on the release of the product or not? So CB30, how many days you want us to wait?
before,
30 days only or beyond that?
if for, I'm sorry, for what?
The CBE 30, if you file, how many days you want us to wait for a decision to be received from FDA? Is it 30 days or beyond 30 days?
Tony, would you like to
Start the
take that?
answer for this. If it's a CBE 30,
Yeah.
it's baked into the definition. You're telling us that you're going to be making the change and you're going to be implementing that change at the end of that 30-day period. After that, then the gamble's on you. If you've done your homework correctly, you can go ahead. And of course, for the majority of the quality ones, we're actually seeing OPQ ahead of the 30-day response. So many times there won't even be ambiguity. But that's what the difference is between a PAS, a CBE 30, and a CBE 0.
But we get an email that CBE 30 is granted, but no action letter comes. Even sometimes, we receive after 8 months, 9 months. That approval of the CBE 30.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, we grant them within the 30 days.
Yes.
But as Ted mentioned, it's upon you to make sure that, you follow whatever regulation. And yeah, I understand you're saying you don't get the approval for later on because there's no goal date for a CBE. But again, it's upon you to make sure that, even though we're granting it, to make sure, it's going to be, everything's okay with the application.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, online question, please.
Right. First question is for Ted. Our experience is that FDA is using the late cycle amendment provision of the GDUFA 3 commitment letter and moving the goal date 90 days from the submission date of the response amendment, even for minor questions when approval is received by the original goal date. Can you please explain the decision-making for FDA as to whether to apply imminent action versus moving the goal date for late cycle amendments? Or will goal dates always be moved for late cycle amendments?
I don't know how many questions were in that one question.
That's okay. I can go ahead and start, and if I miss something, then please chime in. First of all, not every late cycle amendment results in an extension. And we talked earlier about the imminent actions, right? That's a great example. We're using that 60-day period. There's a whole nother type that we didn't have time to discuss today, and that's where we do late cycle, but we still honor the original date. And so there's a whole host of issues that come into play, including what we think your response time will be, how much effort it will take us to respond, the criticality of the product. If it's a drug shortage or public health, then obviously we're going to try to do everything we can to fast track that. And so those are all the variables that have to be factored in. And then each discipline is sort of responsible for making their decision on when to go for the formal extension, the imminent action, or do it within the goal date. And of course, alternatively, and this is one, don't forget, we could issue the CRL, and for those who've been around a long time, in the old days, that was the only choice. If you missed dotting the I, we had to issue the formal complete response or the not approval letter for those who go back a long time. And so we've implemented these changes to help keep the momentum of the review team in place and try to minimize some of the more bureaucratic effort that goes into making sure that the complete response letter is very formal. It's an official document versus the informal IRs and DRLs. And so really, it's a successful program. I know that sometimes companies struggle with not knowing what type of change is going to be resulting in an extension or an imminent action. Work with your project managers. In certain cases, you may have to talk to the discipline project manager, but always start with the regulatory project manager, and he or she will direct you accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Let's go in-house with the mic closer to me here.
Great, thanks. Question related to the scope of the PLAIRs. In the presentation, supplements were specifically excluded from the PLAIR process, which conceptually I get for the vast majority of supplements, but I guess where I don't necessarily understand whether it's a FDA policy decision or there's something in the statute that prohibits it is, why are new strength supplements also prohibited from the PLAIR process?
Yes, the decision was made based on resources available to the industry to appropriately manage. You might have seen the numbers of supplements. But 10%, at least with the supplement.
Thank you. Let's go to the mic at the far end of the room, please.
So I have a question regarding supplements. In case where we can't decide if the change is CB0 or CB30, can we have like a formal discussion with FDA, the PM? Or do you suggest that we just go ahead and file the supplement and wait for a response?
Can you repeat the beginning part? It was hard to hear your initial statement.
So in cases where we are unable to decide if the manufacturing change for an approved ANDA would be a CB30 or a CB0, in that case, do you suggest that we go ahead and submit the supplement, or we have a formal discussion with the PM?
Well, I mean, you may have a discussion if you like. I mean, we're always available. If you submit it as a, CB0 and our reviewers, deem that it is not, then, we'll contact you and notify you that, it is being elevated to a CB30 or a PAS. So, regardless if you submit it as a particular supplement and our reviewers, feel that it is not in that category, we will notify you of the change.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask another question?
I think Ted had Ted, were you going to add to that? Ted, were you going to add this? No?
I can add one more comment. The starting point too is look at the Code of Federal Regulations 314.70, where they give you some examples of what would qualify for all three types of supplements, but they do call out the difference between a CBE0 and a CBE30. And then there's also some series of actual guidances too that get into other examples. So use those as a starting point before contacting the team, but certainly, as Stephen said, the team will be glad to work with you to help get you into the right path. And if you submit it incorrectly, then there are mechanisms in place to reroute that as the correct type of submission.
Okay, thank you.
If you have another question, let's go to the online first. You can stay there. Online, please.
Okay, a question for either Andre or Andrew. Will a PLAIR be denied if submitted less than 30 days from shipment date, even though the goal date is within the 60-day allowable timeline?
No, the PLAIR won't be denied, but that was a recommendation to submit it no less than 30 days.
Okay, thank you. Mike, closer to me, in-house.
Hi. So regarding the cover letter attachments, is there a threshold where you would expect this to be used? We've previously only used something like this on larger PAS or new applications, so it was a little bit of a surprise to hear that you recommend it. It sounded like for almost everything.
Yes, for the cover letter attachments, we recommend to use it for all submissions, all amendments.
Even annual reports and such?
No, not with the annual reports.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mike 2.
This question is regarding 356H forms. So in case where we're no longer using an API manufacturer, can we remove this from our 356H form if it's a pending ANDA?
Can you repeat that question, please?
So if we're using, for a pending ANDA, we're no longer using an API manufacturer, can we remove it from a 356H form? And we already have another API manufacturer which we're using.
I'm sorry, I still.
She's asking if they're pulling a facility off, do they have to keep listening in on 356H if there's another replacement facility in place?
You should include that you're withdrawing that facility on your 356, even though you're adding an additional facility in its place.
So we need to formally write in a cover letter saying that we're withdrawing the API manufacturer, and then we can submit that. in the 356H form?
Yeah, you should include, you should include an amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, online question, please.
Question for Stephen. When should we contact the RBPM versus the RPM?
Well, for original applications, the RPM is the owner of that project, so they are always the first point of contact. But for any quality information, you can always contact the RBPM, and also for supplements which are managed by RBPMs, you can always contact us.
Thank you. Mike, at the far end, please.
Hi, I have a question regarding the PLAIR process.
Can you come a little closer to the mic, please?
Okay, this question is regarding the PLAIR process. So following the grant of a PLAIR decision, if a CR is issued and it gets classified as a major, either at the time of issuance of the CR itself, it gets classified as a major, or following the submission of the response agency, reclassifies it as a major, then what happens to the product that is already shipped in? Because the goal date would be an 8-month, it's not a priority application, then do we have to destroy the product?
If 6 months have passed and your product is not approved, then it will have to be either destroyed or exported.
If we get an 8-month, if we get an 8-month goal date, is there a provision for us to reach out to you and see if some exception could be made, considering that?
So the import process is very tied to the import bonds with the Customs and Border Patrol. So there's no exceptions to that.
So that basically means that it's truly a risk importing the product unless you know that grant decision is based following adequate review status and not just anticipated.
Correct. That's what Ted mentioned. I think it was Kim mentioned that it's very important that you maintain communications with your RPM because you don't want to take that risk, right?
Yeah, because a lot of times of late we kind of hear that the review discipline is not yet closed out, so the project managers cannot really give you a firm status, and they just say that at this point of time no major issues are identified. So based on that, a grant decision is made, but then later we see that there are questions that get reclassified as major.
Do you have anything to add?
I would say, as I mentioned earlier before, recently we were trying to kind of juggle that kind of stance that you were saying in terms of allowing for more maximal, granting of players, while at the same time understanding that, while we do grant more players, there is potentially situations like you mentioned where, we could potentially grant the player, but may not be approved in time. So I think kind of what Andre was saying, I think your best bet is to kind of communicate with the RPM, understanding the timeframes that we've set out. And, I haven't seen that many cases in those cases of a major. I mean, I think more than likely for minors, that rarely happens where you're kind of stuck in that situation. But I would say that kind of stick with that time frame, and my best advice would be to kind of talk to the RPMs and make sure to understand those time frames before you kind of submit that player, and then that you don't have to fall into that situation.
Thank you. Online question, please.
Right. Question for Ted. Are you tracking the percentage of original ANDA submissions that are first cycle approvals? And if so, where can this information be found?
All right, so the question has to do with first cycle approvals. There's two sources of information. If you go to the standard OGD, which is monthly and now quarterly report, we will list the information, and then there is a specific subsection of the FDA track that goes into more data on first cycles.
Next online question.
Sure. A question for
Go ahead, in-house? Sorry, let's do the in-house.
Sure.
So I have one question for Ed. Ted.
Can you step up to the microphone?
I have one
please?
question for Ted on the median approval times. I think slide number 14 of your presentation talks about the median this is regarding the presentation that you made on the median approval times. Slide number 14 refers to the percentage of approvals with different median approval times. Is that the number of approvals that have happened based on the year of receipt, or is it 50% of the applications received in a certain year are approved? How do we interpret that percentage?
Hopefully I'm hearing this right. It's very hard to hear up here, so I apologize if I'm not answering the right question. If you're looking to find out where we get the mean and median data, we're looking at the approval actions for that quarter and taking all of those. And that's why it fluctuates so much from quarter to quarter.
No, not the quarter one, but there was one more slide about based on the year of receipt. I think from 2010 onwards, you have given what's the percentage of median approval times. For that slide in 2022 also, I see there's something listed for 50% as like maybe 15 months as the median approval time. So is that the number of applications that got approved in that fiscal year versus the year of receipt?
If you're asking about the sort of set of 3 approval charts all in a row with different sort of extrapolations,
Right.
that's tracking from the cohort of receipt of the original application. So if our first exposure, then we start to look, how long did it take us to approve sort of the fastest 5, 10, 25, 50%? And so it's by cohort of receipt. So you can look at the raw submissions for the year. That's what we're doing.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Online question, please.
Question for Andre. If importation of drug product is planned in 2 separate shipments, is one PLAIR enough for both, or should we submit 2 PLAIRs?
You only get 1 shipment, so it's only 1 PLAIR per application.
Next online question, please.
Sure. Another question for Andre, actually. Please confirm if PLAIRs are only indicated for medications for which the product is manufactured outside of the United States?
Is for finished dosage form drug products pending approval of the application from a foreign manufacturing facility.
Do we have any more online questions? Okay.
Yeah, okay. Another question for Andrew this time about PLAIR. If a PLAIR can be granted before the ANDA is approved, it could happen that the product is already imported but not in the final labeling, as this review is potentially not completed by the labeling division. How can this be managed? I understand that I have to repack the goods with the approved labeling, or is there any derogation that applies to goods imported under PLAIR?
So as I discussed during the presentation, we allowed for product to be minimally further processed. That will include labeling, changes to labeling, right? And that will all have to occur within that 6-month period where the product has been imported and receiving actual final approval.
Thank you. Online question?
Okay. Either for Andrew or Andre, what teams are consulted before a PLAIR is granted or rejected?
So as I mentioned earlier, when before a PLAIR is granted, the deputy director will consult with the regulatory project manager, as well as the discipline project managers, who also speak with the individual discipline review assessment teams to kind of make that determination whether a PLAIR should be granted or denied.
Thank you. Let's go to our in-house question.
Yeah, a question for Ted. This is regarding the goal date, the GDF goal date. Before the goal date, project manager updates that all the disciplines are complete and adequate. Then there's a question about RLD labeling update, and they ask us to update the labeling. And we update the RLD labeling, and the goal date is immediately pushed by another 3 months. So is there a mechanism to redress and to reconsider this push?
All right, if I'm understanding the question, what we're seeing is an application that's sort of maturing its way through the cycle, and then we're getting a late reference listed drug, the new drug, updating its label.
Correct.
So what we normally see in those situations is the applicant's responsibility, obviously, to make sure that the application has the most recent new drug approved, sort of replicate labeling. Obviously, there's permissible differences, but you're responsible for matching the RLD. So the vast majority of time, you're going to be sending us an unsolicited amendment to do that update.
They classified it as solicited amendment, not unsolicited.
Even if we ask you, which we will do if people are slow to pick up on it, the burden is always on the applicant to have the right one. Now, our labeling team does shift into proactive mode, and they will reach out and remind people that there was a recent update and you need to get your labeling in. The vast majority of time, that's going to result in an extension. There's very limited circumstance where we're allowed to approve an application where the generic drug label is different than the brand. There is a little bit of wiggle room. You can go into the regs. It's called the J10 provision, but it's something that's historically seldom been used just because of all the different pieces have to be in place before the agency is empowered to make that change.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have a second question in-house, please.
Hi, thank you all for your presentations. They were very helpful. I have a question regarding one of our ENDAs recently. The goal date was missed, and the reason was given that there are some complex regulatory questions or issues that are being worked at, and we will be informed later. It's been almost a month since then. We haven't heard anything. So what do? We keep on reaching out to RPM, or agency will tell us something at some point? How does this work?
Certainly, if you're in a space where you're past the goal date and you've been communicating with regulatory project management, and you're sort of left with, oftentimes you'll hear a complex, or we'd like to also call it thorny regulatory issue that has to be untangled before the agency is able to take an action. You can communicate with regulatory project manager. Always, that's your best place to start. If it's something that seems to be languishing with the agency for an extended period of time, then you can talk to the regulatory project manager and they can help you sort of navigate internally escalating those. And we do have mechanisms where people more senior in the organization, myself included, will have frequent communications with the company and explain what we can. Oftentimes in that situation, there's very little that the project manager is allowed to say. It could be a case where there's something that has to potentially be changed with the reference listed drug. And so we have to resolve that issue first. And then, of course, there's confidentiality issues. We can't disclose it until the reference listed drug owner understands it and has made the change and updated the label or whatever the appropriate fix may be. And then that goes into the other part of the equation. Because it's outside of the immediate control of sort of the OGD OPQ team, then the timing gets a little bit more nebulous. And that's why they're not able to say on June 1st. We want to be very cautious with giving people a date past the goal date. We're only going to give a date if we're 99.9% sure that it can be met, because we know how important that is for folks. And we also know how complex things are on the agency, where one meeting may lead to another meeting, which may lead to another. And so it's not uncommon, unfortunately, that we do get into those places. So if you've talked to the regulatory project manager a couple times and you still need traction, or your management is coming down on you to show that you're elevating it, talk to them and tell them that you would like to. They're not going to be offended. We don't have a lot of these cases. We miss a small percent, but certainly in a program as big as this is, there's always several misses at any given time. Their experience, they're used to navigating in this space. They will not be offended if you ask to elevate it. We will always work with you. And then if you think that you're not getting the traction that you want, another source is you can go outside of the generic drug program to the CEDAR ombudswoman. She's very good. She'll be the detective, go in and sort of sort out the root cause analysis. If we've done our job right on the OGD OPQ side of things, then she may come back with almost identical answer, because that's as much as we're legally allowed to say. But she will give you an independent assessment of the issue and whether or not the program is in fact doing everything in its power to move your application forward.
Thank you so much.
We have time for one last question online.
Okay. Question for the panel. For applications granted a priority review designation, should applicants include a request for priority review on all responses to discipline review letters and information requests?
A priority request should be included in each resubmission if an applicant is looking for a priority review, with 3 exceptions: drug shortages, public emergency drugs, and PEPFAR drugs.
Thank you. So that's the end of our question and answer session. Thank you to all our panelists who stayed for the last, and see you tomorrow.